Okay, so take two. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Vanessa and I am the UK Sales and Operations Manager for Erchonia. Tonight we are joined by Erchonia President Steve Shanks, all the way from Florida. So this is the first time really that we have done a live stream with Steve for Europe and the Middle East. So Steve, would you like to introduce yourself and obviously tell our doctors, tell our practitioners a little bit about yourself and your kind of history with Erchonia?
So again, my name is Steve Shanks. I'm the president of Erchonia. We started out in 1996 when my dad was in a doctor's office, and my partner at that time, Kevin, started fixing these lasers that were coming over from Europe. There are these big helium gas tubes, and it would take him forever to get fixed. Kevin was an engineer, so he started fixing his lasers, and then he started building his own lasers. So at that point, Kevin started selling them out of the office. So Kevin kind of predated me by about 6 months, and I was in sales and marketing at that time. So he's like, hey, what do you think about starting to sell these lasers? I had a full-time job, which I think I held a full-time job for about the first 4 years the company was in business, so we could afford Erchonia. So that's really kind of how we got started.
Okay, great. And now obviously the company's grown so much, we're in pretty much the majority of countries across the globe as well, which is really nice. And obviously Erchonia now hold 20 of the 23 FDA clearances given to low-level light lasers. And this is actually one more. You've got one more FDA clearance since I joined the company last year. So obviously Erchonia predominantly are a research and development company. We strive to be at the forefront of research and development. Why is that always so important, the research and development side of things, as opposed to, let's say, because there are so many devices available, you know, you can market anything and say that it works. But why is the research and the development side of all of our lasers so important?
Well, our motivating factor for us was the FDA.
Yeah.
So we got a warning letter in 1998 that basically says, seize, impound, going to close your doors, typical FDA letters. That really turned us into a research and development company. Okay. At that time, no low-level lasers were cleared by the FDA. So we kind of championed it upon ourselves to, okay, let's be the first. Yeah. And to this day, if you're going to get an indication for low-level lasers with the FDA, you have to blinded controlled clinical trials. So those take years and years to get through the FDA, and we're working on 6 or 7 indications at any one time.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the first laser that really came to market? So, you know, we didn't start with the fat loss lasers. That came, you know, after a period of time. So talk us through the journey. So what happened first? What was the first kind of laser, the first wavelength, the first FDA clearance? And how after that has it naturally developed into obviously what we have now as, let's say, the emerald laser? Talk us through that kind of the years behind that.
Okay, so obviously when we got our warning letter from the FDA, we had to get FDA cleared. So we picked probably the easiest indication that we thought would be get through the FDA would be chronic neck and shoulder pain. So we started our first clinical trial in probably 1999. It was so good, the FDA said, nope, you need to do another one. So we did 2 blinded and controlled clinical trials. Okay. So that kind of launched us, and we got that in January of 2000. January 2000. So that kind of became the first 2002, the first low-level laser that was cleared by the FDA.
Yeah.
So from there, you know, our next one was liposuction.
Okay.
It started out in 1998. So by doing so much research, it gives us a lot of ideas of what we're going to do next. Yeah. So we do a lot of mechanisms to prove which wavelengths we're going to want to do now, because obviously we know after 25 years, we know a lot more. Yeah. So the 2004 510K from the FDA for liposuction started out in 1998. So 1998, we're at a conference in Las Vegas, the anti-aging show, and I meet a plastic surgeon named Rodrigo Nera and his wife, Clara Nera. Yeah. And at that point, neither of them spoke English. Clara spoke broken English. They were kind of going back and forth between us and another company. And, you know, they said, well, we trust you. So he said, okay, so you're doing this for liposuction. Why? Because, well, I've read some stuff on wound healing with low-level laser therapy, which is, you know, a little bit in the journals back then, not much. But I said, look, why don't you laser them before and then laser them after? Yeah. So as a plastic surgeon for liposuction, he found out when he put his cannula in there that that fat was like butter. So 6 months later, he comes back to me, he goes, at this point, he's spending his own money. He's doing transmission electron microscopy. He's looking at MRIs, and he proved fat emulsification, which we published in 2000. So we knew we could emulsify fat. Well, the first time Rodrigo presents in the United States to his plastic surgeon colleagues, they basically laugh him out of there. I mean, he is in tears.
Wow.
So this is about 2002. I go, look, Rodrigo, we've already gone through the FDA process. Let's prove them all wrong, and we'll get a 510K for liposuction.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. Since then, we've been publishing on fat, which now are probably so knocked off. You see a lot of our pictures on other people's websites. I mean, if you go to publications,
Yeah.
it's either my name, my secretary's name, but they all say Erchonia Laser.
Yeah.
So by doing that, if we would have never done that research on liposuction, we would never got to Zerona, which would never got to Emerald. So over the years, as we're doing all this research, we come up with different ideas and how to prove some of our concepts.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's so interesting. So obviously the first generation fat loss was obviously with the 635 nanometer wavelength. And then now it's developed so much that we're at the 532, which is obviously what's in the Emerald. And I think that's obviously what a lot of people that will be watching over in Europe and the Middle East are very familiar with, because obviously it's our brand new laser. We only got the FDA clearance just before COVID in 2019 for overall body circumference reduction. So
That's correct.
It's taken a long, long time. How much, obviously, because we are Erchonia, we're predominantly research and development. What is the big difference in terms of efficacy really between, let's say, the 635, which was first generation fat loss, to where we are now with the 10 diode 532 nanometer wavelength? What's the big difference between the two in terms of efficacy?
Well, originally we thought, okay, we believe that these lasers penetration, they have to deal with photochemistry. And it's about energy transfer. There's about 23% more energy in a green laser than in red lasers.
Okay.
So if that's true, we should be able to cut the time off of our Zerona procedure and go to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what we did, completed the same clinical trial. What we found out is that patients also lost greater inches in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. It was 4 weeks with the Emerald.
Yeah, no, we did another procedure at the Mayo Clinic. Nice thing about working with Mayo is they fund their own research. So they look at our protocol once a week, twice a week, or 3 times a week. And 2 times a week with Emerald is by far the best protocol. Yeah. Which is better than our original research, because we were doing 3 times a week.
3 times a week for 2. Yeah, it's much better. Would you suggest to, let's say if you're doing it twice a week, would you suggest to have intervals in between treatments? So for example, not do it on consecutive days, but let's say maybe do Monday, Wednesday, or a Monday and a Thursday and spread it out throughout the week. What would you suggest would work best? So
when you're going through this process and we're lasering the body, you'll have some people that'll lose 2 inches, some that might lose 6. So what's the difference? Yeah. Depending on how healthy you are is how fast you're going to process that fat. Okay. So say if I came in on a Monday, my body still needs time to get rid of that fat. It just doesn't leave the system. It takes time. Okay. So we suggest allow at least 1 to 2 days between treatments. Yeah. And understand in our clinical trials, especially in obesity, we can't put them on diets. We can't start exercise programs, or they're kicked out of the clinical trial. Exactly. So anything that you can do to help that fat metabolism is going to get a better result. Yeah. So, it's kind of the carrot. So this is the carrot, then whatever the doctor wants to add to speed that process up, it's better for the patient, better for the doctor. Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Especially in the obesity market, for example, you do sometimes in a clinical setting have to combine different things to get the best possible outcome for your patient. But that's a very valid point that you made. Every single study that was done and conducted for FDA clearance with no adjunct therapies and no lifestyle changes. So that proves that the laser does what it says it does. It emulsifies the fat from the fat cell. And, there is scientific proof that happens. I think one of the biggest problems in Europe is the fact that we don't have the same level of standards, let's say, for devices to enter the market
as the states do, because we don't have really the equivalent to the FDA. We don't have anyone governing that. So there's so many devices available that, you know, they claim to have an FDA clearance, but the FDA clearance may be in wrinkle reduction when, you know, they're using that device for fat loss. So there's a big difference there. And we always say to our doctors and, you know, potential people interested, make sure you do your research, look at the clinical trials, and, you know, really, really have a good understanding of what you're investing in, because at the end of the day, it's your patients, you know, that you want to provide the best thing for your patients. Okay. So a lot of people will say, obviously, with, let's say, with the Emerald or with any of our fat loss any laser that we have, really, that they don't feel anything. So if they don't feel anything, they psychologically think it's not working. You've probably heard this so many times throughout the years. What kind of is your response to that? What do you say when somebody says that?
Well, what I ask them is, if I'm going to take like Tylenol or Advil for pain and I swallow it, do I feel anything?
No.
I don't feel anything. So that's called biochemistry. What we're doing with low-level lasers is photochemistry. It's the same process, except we can go right to the area. We don't have to go through the stomach. With photochemistry, there's no side effects. So the other big thing which you guys are probably seeing in the market, like we see in the market here, is LEDs.
All the time.
So I've got an article right here, published out of Biomedicine. It says it has to be a low-level laser to work, which I can send this to all your people. This is well studied. LEDs are not coherent. Jim Oshman, Energy Medicine, wrote in his book, cells speak in a laser coherent-like fashion. We have been using LEDs as placebo devices on everything from pain to fat to toenail fungus to autism, you name it. LEDs for us are placebo devices. If they worked, we would use them because they're a lot, you know, an LED probably costs 10 cents.
It does.
And these people are charging 10 thousands of devices for these things.
I know.
You know, there's just so much bad information out there. Like when you're talking about regulatory, you know, I sit in a lot of the FDA meetings. 90% of all devices in the US do not have any clinical research. Of that 10% that do, almost none of it's blinded and controlled. So when you're buying a device, okay, where did you come up with the protocol? I want to see published research that you use that protocol to prove that this device is effective. If not, you're taking the word of a salesperson.
Yeah, exactly. This is the big problem I think that we face. You know, companies can invest millions and millions of pounds in a good marketing strategy, and if you've got a good marketing strategy, people automatically assume that it's gonna be good, but it's not always the case. You know, because going back to the fundamentals of actions to how the lasers work for fat loss is they don't kill fat cells. There's so many devices out there, so many different technologies, not to name any brands, but there's a lot of different technologies that kill fat cells. Why do you think that it's so important not to kill fat cells? And what has the research shown as to why we shouldn't be killing fat cells, but just optimizing the function of the fat cell, which is obviously what the technology does?
If you're killing the fat cell is the largest endocrine organ in your body. It helps along with your immune system. The reason why you see most of these devices that are killing fat cells, well, every device that kills the fat cells, it takes them 2 to 4 months to see a result. Why is that? Your body's got to produce all that dead material. With our lasers, we're not killing a fat cell. We're just creating a transitory pore, which has been well published. It leaks out into the system. It's picked up by the lymphatic system, and then the body processes it. So I'm sure you've seen all the stuff that's going on with Cool Sculpting now. They're creating a new process for some of the things that they're doing with, you know, creating apoptosis or programmed cell death. That's not controllable. We can't control inflammation, where it goes, and how long it's going to heal. It's different for everybody. There are no known side effects with low-level laser therapy. If you're cooking a cell with hot lasers, or you're freezing it, or I guess the latest gimmick is they're using massagers to do this. I mean, there's one company in the US, they're marketing like crazy. And I do all the regulatory work along with Travis here. We went and followed it. There's 128 different companies that have the exact same device, and it's a glorified massager thrown in with a couple other toys. But the indication is for muscles and, you know, in topical heating. It's ridiculous, some of this, but they spend millions on marketing. We spend millions on research.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the big difference between something that's classed as fully medical and something that's not. That's the big difference. I always say to people as well that, we're different to other companies. We don't flood the market with devices, and we don't, blow our entire budget on marketing. We much prefer to have the solid research that backs it up, because then that's why our customer satisfaction levels are in the high 90s, because people are so happy with the results that they're seeing. It speaks for themselves at the end of the day. In fact, quite often people say, there's no way, this is too good to be true. There's no way that those before and after pictures have come from just lying under the emerald. I'm like, trust me, like this is what happens. Like, honestly, I've seen it with my own eyes. It really does work. And people are like, well, it's too good to be true, but it's not. It's literally just pure science as to what it does. That's literally all it comes down to. I think, I think a lot of people often get confused with the term laser, and they often think that, depth of penetration is very, very important. And we always say, look, depth of penetration is irrelevant when it comes to, let's say the emerald, for argument's sake. Why is depth of penetration not important with the Erchonia lasers?
So a lot of the things that you're bringing up, we did research to prove our point. So we were getting the same thing, that laser's never going to penetrate. And I would walk up to them. Here's a 2000 publication that showed fat emulsification. Here's a doctor sticking a cannula on the body, seeing how easy the fat is extracted. It proves that. So then they said, well, their next argument was, well, if you're lasering your abdomen, your waist, hips, and thighs, all you're doing is fat shifting. So we published a study in lasers and surgery medicine. We measured systemic points. So we measured we lasered waist, hips, and thighs. We measured knees, ankles, chests, and arms, and they all shrunk.
Yep.
Systemic effects with low-level laser therapy are well published. Yep. And that's because of photochemistry. This depth of penetration stuff with infrared lasers is nothing but a bunch of garbage. If you're going to ablate your tissue, you're going to use a 1064 laser because it only penetrates millimeters in the skin. So the marketing people come back and say, well, if I treat a big spot, I'm not going to ablate your tissue and I'll heat and it'll penetrate deeper. That's insane. Infrared lasers are penetrated by water. It vibrates the cell. They do not create photochemical effects. Yep. That's not me saying it. That's well published. You need 1.78 electron volts to create a photochemical effect. You're never going to get that with infrared laser. When you start throwing more photon or more power, all you do is throw more photons. So with us, we use very low power that are highly energetic, which works along with the immune system. Okay,
perfect. Talk us through, because I think some people think, because when we've touched upon this briefly, but when people say, obviously you've got an FDA clearance, it's every company says they have an FDA clearance. How difficult is the process of what, let's say, Erchonia do with the double-blinded, randomized, multi-centered, placebo-controlled study? How difficult is that process, and how long would you say it takes? You've already mentioned that we spend millions of dollars per study, but how talk us through the process. How does it work, and how long will it take?
Okay, so we'll talk about our first device for non-invasive fat reduction. So we started thinking about that in 2006, started the process with the FDA. So we send them a protocol. They review the protocol and get back with us with suggestions. That process is anywhere from 6 months to a year. Okay. Before that, we've done a pilot study. That's another 6 months. So by the time we get to clinical trial, we're at least a year and a half in the process. Yeah. So then we run the clinical trial, which is probably at least a year. Clinical trials go slow. Then we have to go through the FDA process. Yeah. The FDA process to prove Zerona was 2 years once they had the data. So we had to do lipid panel studies, because the FDA's biggest concern was, well, how do we know you're not spiking triglycerides and cholesterol? Well, what we proved is that we were actually reducing triglycerides and cholesterol. Yeah. So I tell everybody, it's a 2 to 5 year process minimum for 510K, which is why we're all running so many at the same time, because there's not a beginning and a starting. The end of it is when we get the 510K. Yeah.
Well, that's another interesting thing. A lot of doctors, well, especially I'm talking UK based, but a lot of doctors in the UK are like, well, can you not just make an emerald where it's just literally a bed that I can lie on, and obviously then I'll get the full body fat reduction. Doesn't quite work like that, does it? Because obviously there was some study that was conducted that what showed if you place the diode directly on the skin, it's not as effective as if you keep it a distance away and have that obviously rotating beam that's obviously in the emerald.
Yeah, there's a lot of research, even with a 3 milliwatt diode laser, which 3 milliwatt is virtually nothing. In one spot, within 30 seconds, you can start damaging your DNA, which is why we're always spinning the lasers.
Yeah.
You know, if you're looking at with photochemistry, although I'm shining on my abdomen, the laser's taking what it needs on the top cells and it's passing the energy on deeper and deeper, and then throughout the entire system.
Yeah.
People just have a tough time grasping what photochemistry is, but that's how we've created our business.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's the education, you know, it's the doctors that understand that, and that they invest their time in understanding that they get it. It makes sense to them. But yeah, people often ask, well, what happens with my emerald when you bring out a 12 diode machine? I'm like, look, it'll take some time. Anyways, even if we did bring out a 12 diode machine, it's going to take some time because of the long process. You know, we would never put anything to market unless it's tested, proven, we have a specific, obviously, FDA clearance for it. And I would say, you know, how long did it take for the emerald from, like, let's say when you had the idea to when it actually launched? How long was that process? It was a good few years, right?
Yeah, well, I talked to you about the clinical process.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother engineering behind it. I tell everybody our first 510K submitted to the FDA might have been, I don't know, 400 or 500, no, probably 300 or 400 pages. Now they're tens of thousands of pages. Half of that is just building up devices. We could have never started this business today just from the manufacturing of a new device. We have to go through so many processes. You know, you guys are starting to go to MedSap. We're compliant there. South America has their own rules. China has their own rules. So we got the Emerald FDA cleared in 2014. We just released the device, what, 5 years ago? I'm sorry, a year and a half, 2 years ago?
Yeah, that exactly. Yeah, that's very true. Very, very true.
So we've done 3 blinded controlled clinical trials with Emerald. We did it on up 20 to 30 BMI, cellulite, and 30 to 40 BMI. Yeah. The reason why we went to 30 to 40 BMI is because in the US market, patients are getting a lot heavier. And right now there's nothing out there for them.
That honestly, the latest stats show that over 60, I think it's either 62 or 64% of the UK population are either overweight or obese. And you're quite right. Typical, let's say, technologies that you'd use, let's say cryolipolysis or excessive heating, you cannot treat patients with a BMI between 30 and 40. You can't. It's unsafe to do so. So these are the patients that really need help when it comes to fat loss. But you're quite right. There is absolutely nothing for them on the market whatsoever. And that's where the Emerald, I think, it works perfectly. The changes that it does, because I find that patients get so much more healthier after having a program of treatments. They're generally healthier. And it changes their lives, and people are literally like, well, you know, just lie under it. It honestly, it works. And it's down to the education, which obviously we're responsible for delivering to you all, so that you really understand what it does.
Your doctor should also look at what they're approved for. So if you're using cryolipolysis or heat, they're cleared to affect appearance of fat. Yeah. What is affecting appearance of fat? So they do a trial where the patient's their own control. They treat one side and they don't treat the other. In cryolipolysis, they said we can lose 25% of your fat. That's not allowed by the FDA because there was no fat reduction proven. But if you look on their website, that's 1.8 millimeters. So what they're saying is you can see with your human eye a 1.8 fat millimeter reduction on your flank compared to the other side. My eyes aren't that good. We have fat reduction claims. We're reducing your circumference. So it's a different form of science. Yeah. Theirs is not credible gold standard science. It's basically a guess, where ours you can measure.
Exactly. It was 6 inches for the obesity study, wasn't it?
Yeah, and 6 inches, when you look at that, you have some people that might have lost 8 or 9, and some people that might lost 4 to 5, but the average is over 6 inches. Yeah,
that's because, you know, you can't pick and choose who's going to take part in a study. You know, it's got to be completely objective, so the results will, you know, vary throughout.
Yeah. So currently we're doing another study at the Mayo Clinic where we're looking at we're going to look at Zerona along with the Mayo diet. I'm sorry, Emerald with the Mayo diet. So we're
okay.
going to see, and we're also looking at things like C-reactive inflammation in the blood, triglycerides, A1C. So we want to start looking more and more at, okay, what are we affecting? If we're reducing this fat, we should be reducing inflammation in the blood. We should be reducing A1C. So that now we're looking at more of a healthier aspect. Since we're not killing anything, we're boosting the immune system. Theoretically, these things should start dropping.
Well, absolutely. It just makes sense. And obviously, because you're releasing the fat from the fat cell, you're obviously reducing how inflamed that fat cell is. And, you know, inflammation in the body is the root cause of all disease. So that fundamentally needs to be reduced. But I've seen it with my own eyes, just from patient feedback, case studies. All these things do improve, but obviously it's having that study behind it to show, look, this really does happen, because that makes a massive difference. You touched upon cellulite. So the 532 nanometer laser does have a clearance for cellulite. And obviously, if you think what cellulite is, it's essentially an enlarged fat cell. It's pushing up against the surface of the skin. So that's why the green lasers, especially the emerald, is so multifunctional, because you can obviously treat fat loss, but cellulite as well. So talk me through the cellulite clearance. How did that kind of come about?
Well, we started looking at cellulite because all devices, you're not going to read a lot of blind and controlled clinical trials on cellulite unless it's with a drug or an injection.
Yeah.
So we look at fat loss, kind of like you explained. It's a fat problem, but it's also a fibrosis problem. So you have fibrotic tissue in there.
Yeah.
So some of the research we did at the University of Chicago, Illinois, we found that the best wavelength to deal with fibrosis was 532 nanometers.
Okay.
So it kind of made sense to use that on cellulite.
Okay. Perfect. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please comment on them, and we will try and answer them. If not, we'll comment on them at the end, which is not a problem whatsoever. You touched upon the fact that there are no side effects, no reported adverse side effects since 1996 with any of the lasers. How important is that from, let's say, Erchonia's perspective, that you're not only offering a very effective treatment, but you're also offering a very, very safe treatment? You mentioned all the stuff that's happening with cryolipolysis at the moment and how it's dangerous, you know, all these claims that are coming out. So how important is it to offer patients a healthy fat loss treatment?
So from a clinician's perspective, if I'm going to offer a procedure to a patient and I've decided to purchase the device, or however I obtain the device, it's hit that person's name.
Yeah.
If I give you a treatment and it doesn't work, the patient's going to get mad at the doctor. Then It becomes the doctor's name.
And reputation.
And reputation. And word of mouth spreads quick.
It does, exactly.
So the second thing is, if I'm creating lots of side effects, not only does that hurt the doctor, but patients talk to patients that talk to patients, and you start losing market share. Patients won't come into the office because they hear bad things.
I know.
You know, with us, there's no known side effects. I mean, the small amount of power that we're using, it's effective. You know, that's one people don't really understand. Well, if 10 milliwatts is good, then 1,000 milliwatts or 10 watts should be better. That's kind of like saying if a therapeutic dose of Advil is 200 milligrams, let's take 6 or 7 grams because it's going to work better. You're just going to start creating so many side effects. It's ridiculous. It's the same thing with lasers. You can overstimulate, which is why all the research that we've done showing how we can get that fat out of that fat cell, we've already proven it. So from there, it's just going to the clinical model and proving it to the FDA so we can go and market to the doctors.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, so the first generation green laser had only 6 diodes. So the treatment time was 40 minutes. But with the emerald, obviously, it's only a 30-minute treatment. Sometimes I get asked all the time, can I, let's say, laser for 60 minutes just on the abdomen area? Will they get any benefit from doing that? And my answer is no. You know, that's not really the protocol we recommend. Would you say I'm right in saying that? Why is, let's say, the 30-minute kind of treatment time, why is that optimum? And why would you not, let's say, laser for double the amount of time on the one area that you've treated?
Well, 2 reasons. One, we've proven the laser protocol. So you don't have to guess. We've already proven it in multiple clinical trials.
Yeah. 2,
once you open up that fat cell and release that fat, it's what the body's going to get rid of. You can keep lasering. We answered this question in one of our first fat studies. We were like, okay, if we're lasering every other day for 2 weeks, let's laser 5 times in 1 week. So we brought patients in every day.
Okay.
It didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
We flooded the system with so much fat, the body couldn't process it. It was half as good as at 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you have to think about metabolism and fat metabolism.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I always say that there's just no benefit of doing it whatsoever. You know, you need to have that 1 to 2 treatments a week. Dependent, everyone's different as well. So you've obviously, metabolism is very important to help transport that emulsified fat out of the body. So that's why we always say that's the protocol. And obviously the protocol, we can obviously have that overall body circumference reduction, because the protocol, as you treat the opposite side to what you have treated. And people say, well, can I not just do the full 30 minutes, let's say with the patient lying on their back? Why do I need to flip them over? But that's obviously a very, very important part of the protocol. That's the protocol. You don't go to your doctor and they say, you know, take these tablets here, and you're like, no, I won't take them there. You know, that is literally the protocol. So that's what we recommend you stick to.
Yeah, you're going to get your best results shining right on the area that you want to treat. Are you going to get a systemic effect? You absolutely are going to get a systemic effect.
Yeah,
it's going to happen. You know, so stick with the protocol. It's been proven 15 minutes. We thought in obese and morbidly obese patients, 15 minutes is probably as long as they can lay down.
Very true. Yeah, that's
so,
a factor you've got to take into account as well.
Yeah, and so I would stick with the 50-minute protocol. It seems like when you're under it, it seems long, but it's really not that long of a procedure.
No, it's not. It's you know, one of the biggest feedbacks that we get is it's really relaxing. People really, really enjoy coming in for it because there's no pain, no downtime, no discomfort. So it's not as if, you know, if you're going for something that's going to be painful and lasts a long, long time, you psychologically don't want to do that because it's painful. And us as humans, we don't like pain. But obviously with the fat loss lasers or even the pain lasers, they're very, very pleasant. You don't feel anything, and, you know, you can actually enjoy coming in for it. Yeah,
they're absolutely true.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let me see if there's any questions. I can't see any. Okay, that's fine. If anyone has, I feel like we've covered actually quite a lot. I think me and you can probably just talk very, very fast. That's maybe why
I'm a fast talker.
Yeah, we are fast and to the point like this.
Yeah.
No, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everybody who is watching this now or on repeat will really, really find that all interesting. I think it's really important for us, for Europe and the Middle East, to educate everybody because the technology isn't new, but the mindset of how you implement it into your clinical setting may be just something for you to get your head around. But one thing's for sure, the technology works fantastically well. It delivers a result. And every single doctor that we currently have in the UK is over the moon with it. I had an email just before saying how happy they were. They probably need to buy a second Emerald very, very soon because it's that busy. And in fact, one of our clinics actually did just say that after about 3 months. So it's just back to back nonstop. So they're really, really happy with it. And so because it's a low level light laser, you don't need to maintain it. You don't need to let it cool down. You don't need a separate cooler with it or anything like that. So it can literally run all day and your patients will be very, very happy. So Steve, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll do another one of these again very, very soon. If anyone has any suggestions as to what they want to hear, please just let us know. And yeah, you will obviously, Steve, you enjoy your afternoon over in Florida, and everyone else enjoy their dinner tonight. And we'll catch up with you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Bye.